It's really interesting when you think about addiction. It's almost like you get stuck in a rut in your brain, like you want to break free,
Yeah.
but those cravings keep pulling you back. So today we're going to dive into how psychedelics might offer a way to actually reset those neural pathways and help people overcome addiction.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area of research for sure. We're really moving beyond just managing addiction and more into like exploring the possibility of rewiring those reward circuits.
Okay, so before we get too deep into like the whole brain science thing, I think it's important to say, the experience of psychedelics is very personal. We always hear about this, set and setting being crucial, but I'm curious, what does the research actually say about that?
Well, a recent study found a really interesting connection. It seems like people who use psychedelics with positive intentions, like maybe focusing on personal growth and, do it in a natural setting, surrounded by people they love, they actually reported less psychopathology and even like increased well-being afterward.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
Hmm.
It really highlights how, the context of the experience can really shape those effects.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the substance itself, but the entire environment and mindset.
Exactly. It really shows, how holistic these experiences can be.
Okay, so let's zoom in on the brain now. We're talking about, receptor targets like 5-HT2A and kappa opioid receptors. These are like these tiny little gateways in our brains.
Yeah.
And it seems like psychedelics interact with them in very specific ways. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. So each psychedelic seems to have its own kind of unique way of interacting with those receptors. So for example, classic psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin, they primarily act as agonists at serotonin receptors, especially at the 5-HT2A subtype. So think of an agonist like a key that fits perfectly into a lock, which in this case is the receptor, and activates it. And, that activation is thought to be a major part of the psychological effects that we see.
So it's like they're flipping a switch in the brain.
Yeah, and in a way you could say that. Now, MDMA works a bit differently. It actually boosts the levels of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine by blocking their reuptake. It's kind of like if you put a dam in a river to increase the water level. So this triple action might explain its unique benefits, like especially in fostering empathy and connection.
That makes sense. And I know there's a lot of buzz around ibogaine and its potential to reduce those cravings, particularly for people with opioid addiction. What makes it so unique?
Ibogaine is really a fascinating case. It interacts with a whole web of neurotransmitter systems, including modulating NMDA and dopamine, which are key players in how our brain processes rewards and motivation.
So could ibogaine actually interrupt that cycle of addiction by changing how the brain responds to cravings?
That's what we're hoping for. And it goes even deeper than that. Ibogaine also interacts with the kappa opioid receptor, which, plays a role in regulating pain and stress and, importantly, reward. This interaction may be another piece of the puzzle when it comes to understanding its anti-addictive properties.
Now, with all this promise, we also have to acknowledge that ibogaine has a controversial history.
Absolutely. While ibogaine has immense potential, it's also crucial to be aware of the risks. One of the big ones is its potential for cardiac toxicity, which basically means it needs careful medical supervision during use. This is not something to be taken lightly.
And I imagine the history of psychedelic research in general also plays a role here, right? I mean, we've had decades of stigma and all these regulatory hurdles that have made it really difficult to study these substances.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The legacy of that war on drugs and all those restrictions that were placed on research have created a challenging landscape for studying psychedelics. But, we're playing catch up now, and it feels like we're on the cusp of a new era in understanding these powerful substances.
It's almost like we're rediscovering ancient tools with a fresh scientific perspective. So what are some of the most important areas for future research when it comes to psychedelics and addiction?
Well, we need rigorous scientific research to fully understand the long-term effects and the real therapeutic potential of these substances. We need well-designed clinical trials that really investigate their effectiveness and safety for treating all these different types of addictions. And just as important, we need to prioritize responsible use and harm reduction strategies in any kind of therapeutic setting.
I couldn't agree more. And there are some really exciting clinical trials happening right now exploring the use of psychedelics for a range of addictions. It really does feel like we're just scratching the surface of what we can learn.
We are. It's a rapidly evolving field with so much potential to really impact people's lives. And, I think one of the most important areas to focus on is really understanding individual responses to these substances.
Oh, that's interesting. Why do you think that's so important?
Well, we know that not everyone who uses psychedelics has the same experience. Some people have those profound life-changing experiences, and others don't. So the question is, could we actually predict Who's most likely to benefit from psychedelic-assisted therapy for addiction? Could we personalize treatments based on an individual's brain chemistry, their genetics, or even their personality traits?
That's a really good point.
Yeah,
It highlights the need for a more personalized approach to medicine and really recognizing that one size does not fit all.
exactly. And we need to be having these open and honest conversations about the potential benefits and the risks, always grounded in the scientific evidence. It's about finding that balance between acknowledging the historical misuse and embracing the emerging therapeutic applications.
This is all so incredibly fascinating. It
Right.
feels like we're really at the very beginning of understanding the true potential of psychedelics for treating addiction.
We are, and it's an exciting time to be involved in this research. The possibilities are vast.
Well, before we get too carried away with all the possibilities, let's go back to the brain for a minute. I want to talk about serotonin. It's one of those crucial chemical messengers that plays a big role in mood and perception and even addiction. How do psychedelics interact with this system?
Well, this is where it gets a little bit technical,
Yeah.
but I think it's important to understand. So, our brains have a way of prioritizing information, and
Yeah.
they filter out what they think is irrelevant. It's kind of like a spam filter for your inbox.
Right, so we're not constantly bombarded with every little detail.
Exactly. But it seems like classic psychedelics, especially those that target the 5-HT2A receptor that we talked about earlier, they loosen those filters. It's like they're temporarily disabling that spam filter and allowing a flood of sensory and emotional information to reach those higher level processing areas in the brain. This might actually explain why people report feeling more connected to their senses, and they experience those heightened emotions and even have those profound mystical experiences.
Sounds like they're suddenly seeing the world in high definition.
That's a great way to put it. And what's really fascinating is that this disruption of filtering might also impact how the brain processes rewards. Think about addiction. It's often driven by a really intense focus on that substance, like a narrowing of attention that just reinforces the addictive cycle.
So psychedelics could offer a way to break that cycle by broadening the brain's perspective.
That's the idea. It's like shaking up a snow globe and letting all those settled patterns of thought and behavior disperse and then rearrange themselves. And, this brings us to another key brain region, the thalamus.
The thalamus, isn't that the part of the brain that acts like a relay station for all that sensory information? What role does it play in these psychedelic experiences?
Well, we used to think of the thalamus as simply a gatekeeper, It decides what sensory information gets passed on to the cortex, which is the brain's higher-level processing center. But recent research suggests that psychedelics might actually disrupt this gating function and lead to a sort of sensory overload.
So imagine the thalamus is like a bouncer at a nightclub.
Yeah.
Carefully screening who gets in. Psychedelics come along and they tell that bouncer to take the night off.
Exactly. And with the bouncer gone, all those sensory experiences come flooding in. No wonder people report feeling overwhelmed during a psychedelic trip.
It all starts to make sense. The music becomes brighter and the lights are dancing. Even our own internal emotions and thoughts are amplified.
Precisely. This flood of information can be overwhelming, even terrifying for some, but it can also be incredibly insightful. It can offer a fresh perspective on our inner landscape.
This is all so mind-blowing. But I'm curious, after the psychedelic experience fades, are these changes in the brain temporary, or can they actually lead to a more lasting rewiring? Is there really a possibility of hitting that reset button on these deeply ingrained patterns of addiction?
That's the million-dollar question, and there's growing evidence that suggests, psychedelics can promote neuroplasticity, which is the brain's amazing ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections.
So it's not just a temporary shift. It's like creating new pathways in the brain, allowing for different ways of thinking and responding to those triggers.
Exactly. And remember, it's not just about structural changes either. Psychedelics also seem to affect the brain's functional connectivity, how different regions communicate with each other. This could explain the long-lasting changes in mood and behavior and even personality that some people experience after these psychedelic journeys. Think of it this way. The brain's orchestra is suddenly able to play a much wider range of music with different instruments harmonizing in new and unexpected ways.
And that new music might be the key to overcoming addiction, fostering resilience, and unlocking a much deeper sense of well-being.
I truly believe that it could be. The potential is enormous.
Well, this deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about, and I'm sure it's sparked some new ideas for you listening too. We've explored this intricate world of receptors and brain regions and even societal attitudes that shape the emerging field of psychedelic research for addiction.
It's definitely a rapidly evolving landscape full of promise and challenges, but I am incredibly optimistic about the future.
Me too. We've covered a lot of ground today, but there's still so much more to explore. We'll be back soon to dive even deeper into this fascinating world.
Yeah, it really is a journey of discovery and, one that holds, tremendous potential for healing. What I find particularly exciting is that, psychedelics might actually do more than just treat the symptoms of addiction. They might actually get at the underlying trauma and the psychological distress that often lead to substance use in the first place.
That's a really profound thought. It's not just about, managing the addiction. It's about healing the whole person.
Exactly. It's about, empowering people to really rewrite their own stories and break free from those, deeply ingrained patterns. And it seems like psychedelics, when used responsibly and with the proper support, could be those powerful catalysts for that kind of transformation.
It really makes you wonder if psychedelics can help rewire the brain, in such a profound way. Could these insights be applied to other areas of human experience as well? Could they help us foster creativity, enhance learning, or even promote more empathy and understanding in a world that seems to really need it more than ever?
Those are some really thought-provoking questions.
Yeah.
We've been focusing on addiction today, but the potential applications of this research are really, mind-boggling. It highlights how important continued exploration and open-minded inquiry are.
Absolutely. And I have to admit, diving into this topic has made me even more curious about the brain's incredible capacity for change. It's like we have this untapped potential within us, and psychedelics might be one key to unlocking it.
Yeah, I agree. The brain is so much more dynamic and adaptable than we ever thought. It's constantly rewiring itself in response to our experiences, and psychedelics seem to offer this, unique way to accelerate and guide that process.
So speaking of rewiring, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about how psychedelics can promote neuroplasticity. Can you unpack that a bit more? What does that actually look like in the brain?
Sure. So studies have shown that psychedelics can increase the growth of dendrites. Those are the branch-like structures on neurons that receive signals from other neurons. This suggests that there's a potential for, enhanced communication and flexibility within those brain circuits. It's like creating new pathways for information to flow more freely.
So it's not just about breaking down those old patterns, but building new, healthier ones.
Exactly. And remember, it's not just about these structural changes either. Psychedelics also influence functional connectivity, how different regions of the brain communicate with each other. This could be why, some people experience these long-lasting changes in their mood and behavior and even personality after those psychedelic journeys.
That's incredible. It's like the brain's orchestra is suddenly able to play a wider range of music.
Yeah.
Different instruments harmonizing in new and unexpected ways. And who knows, maybe that new music is the key to overcoming, not just addiction, but other challenges that we face as humans.
I think you're onto something there. This research really has the potential to transform our understanding of the brain and its incredible capacity for healing and growth.
So before we wrap up, I want to touch on something that we haven't discussed much yet. The societal impact of all of this research. It seems like there's this growing movement to decriminalize and even legalize some psychedelics for therapeutic use. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's definitely a complex issue with a lot of different perspectives.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to remember that, psychedelics are powerful tools and they need to be treated with respect. We need to ensure that, any therapeutic use is done responsibly and ethically with the proper safeguards in place.
I couldn't agree more. We've seen the harm that can be done when these substances are misused or, taken without proper guidance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not about just opening the floodgates. It's about, creating a safe and supportive environment for people to explore these experiences in a way that promotes healing and growth.
So striking that balance between, scientific rigor, individual freedom, and public safety is going to be crucial moving forward.
Absolutely. It's going to require a lot of thoughtful dialogue, careful planning, and a willingness to learn from both the successes and mistakes of the past.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful. We've covered so much ground, from the intricate mechanisms of, brain receptors to the broader societal implications of this research.
And I think it's safe to say that this is just the beginning of a much larger conversation. The field of psychedelic research is rapidly evolving, and I'm excited to see where it takes us.
Me too. But for now, we need to give our listeners a little time to, digest all of this amazing information. So let's pause here, and we'll pick up this fascinating discussion on our next episode. Welcome back to our deep dive, into the world of psychedelics and addiction. It's been quite a journey so far, hasn't it? I mean, we've really explored everything from those tiny little receptor targets in the brain to, the potential societal shifts that this research could bring about.
Yeah, and we've only just scratched the surface. I mean, there's just so much more to discover and really understand about these powerful substances and how they impact, the human mind.
You know, as we've been talking about, all this incredible science, maybe think back to, those early pioneers of psychedelic research. People like Timothy Leary and Ram Dass. They were exploring these realms way before we had all these fancy, brain imaging techniques that we have today.
Oh, they were definitely ahead of their time. And, their work, while controversial, really paved the way for this, resurgence of research that we're seeing today. It's a good reminder that, scientific progress is often this kind of winding path full of, twists and turns. And sometimes we need to revisit those old ideas with a fresh perspective.
That's so true. And it feels like we're finally at this point where science is really catching up with those early intuitions about, the potential for psychedelics to really heal and transform.
Yeah, I think we are. And it's not just about the science, it's also about shifting, those societal attitudes and creating a more open and accepting space for, these conversations to actually happen. I think we really need to move beyond that fear and stigma that has surrounded psychedelics for so long.
Absolutely. It's really about recognizing that these substances can be, both powerful tools for healing, but also potential sources of harm, depending on how they're used.
Exactly. And that's why, responsible use and education and those harm reduction strategies are absolutely essential. I think we need to learn from the past and, create a future where these substances are used ethically and safely to really benefit, not just individuals, but society as a whole.
Will said. I think we're getting to the end of our deep dive for today.
Huh.
But before we sign off, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. We've talked about how psychedelics might help, reset those neural circuits involved in addiction.
Mhm.
But the implications of all of this research go so much further than, just treating substance use.
Yeah.
What if these insights into the brain's plasticity and, its capacity for change could be applied to other areas of human experience too? Could we use these tools to enhance creativity or, foster deeper connections with ourselves and others, or even, promote a more compassionate and understanding world?
Those are powerful questions, and ones that I really believe we need to be asking ourselves as we move forward. The potential is definitely there. And it's up to us to, approach it with curiosity, but also caution, always guided by those principles of ethical and responsible use.
This has been an incredible journey. We've delved into this fascinating world of psychedelics and explored, their potential to rewire our brains, heal our wounds, and maybe even unlock new possibilities for human experience.
It's been a real pleasure sharing this exploration with you. And remember, knowledge is a powerful tool. And the more we understand about ourselves and, the world around us, the better equipped we are to create a brighter future.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds open to, all those wonders that await us. Until next time.